Gloves here, and today we're going to be talking about resonance, diffraction, diffusion, absorption, and there's one more. Diffraction, refraction, and refraction. So we're going to be talking about these things because as a listener, it's really important to understand them because they're responsible for the way things sound. And I just realized I have a weird thing over here. So let's talk about what exactly these things are, how they work, and that way we can explain phenomena and understand it clearly. So the first one is resonance. We've already talked about resonance. Resonance is basically, it's a boost in a system. Now, there's different types of resonance, and the two that you really need to know about are we have filter resonance, which is a boost wherever the cutoff is. So if a filter is moving around, there could be resonance. Then there's just regular resonance. I guess this is another kind. I didn't intend to explain this one, but it's just a boost. So you have a system of some kind with frequencies and you boost it. You are adding resonance to that signal. And this is like very narrow resonance. This is wider resonance. So it's resonating more at these frequencies. And then resonance, this is a physics standpoint, but I'm not going to explain it like that because we're not getting into physics, we're into acoustics. Basically, systems, you could call anything in the world, like this table, this mouse, a piece of steel, a system that it is vibrating at a particular frequency. And that if you were to give that system the frequency at which it vibrates at naturally, which is called the natural resonance, it will excite that frequency more than it will others. So if we were to, let's just say we had a system that vibrated at, 100 hertz, something simple. And we gave it, 239 hertz. Well, that system would not excite that frequency as much. It would hit it, and then it would just sort of go away. But if we gave it 100 hertz, it would take that, and it would actually excite that frequency more than it would the 239 hertz. And so we'd actually hear that one ring out in that system more than we would have heard the 239 hertz. The same thing goes for the series that follows it. So if we gave it 100 hertz, it would also be responsive to 200, 300, 400, 500. It'd be responsive to that series. And different parts of that series would actually receive different amounts of emphasis. And it would also depend on the system. So if it was like a steel pipe, it'd be a different deal. And it also depends on how you introduce the frequency. There's a whole load of additional things that come into play here, but we're just looking at basic understanding of resonance. So if you have something ringing out from when you give it to a particular instrument, say you're recording something and you notice it, or maybe a room sounds a certain way, it is due to resonance. Standing waves in rooms are frequencies at which the room resonates more at that frequency than others. And what people will do is they'll get graphic EQs and they'll target those frequencies and turn them down. That way they can turn the general sound of the room up. At least in live sound, that's what they do. They call it ringing out the system, and they'll look for those frequencies that are resonant frequencies. So that's that. Now let's talk about diffraction. Diffraction is a pretty simple concept, but before we get into it, I'm not going to explain the math on this. The math is pretty simple, but you just need to have some general ideas. So waveforms that are low are big. They're very long. They're long waveforms. They're big. Waveforms that are high are small. They get really tiny. They get super tiny. But waveforms, and then as you go from low to high, the waveforms get smaller. As you go from high to low, the waveforms get bigger. So those are the generalizations you need to know. Now, diffraction refers to how a sound bends around an object. If a sound diffracts around something, it is bending around that thing. So, for example, most of the frequencies I'm talking in right now are relatively, they're in the mid-range, but they are relatively big compared to this pencil. So if I put this pencil in front of me, you notice that it doesn't really change the sound of my voice hardly at all. It just diffracts right around the pencil, no problem. It's all easy peasy. It goes right through. But if I grab something like this, now some of the high frequencies are smaller than this is. So if I put it in front of me like this and start talking, some of the frequencies can still diffract around this object. They can go around that object, but other frequencies can't. They have a harder time doing it. So as I talk, you notice that they have a harder time. But if I turn it sideways, you notice that more frequencies are able to diffract around this object. And so there's a whole bunch of studies, and we could get into the specifics of how diffraction works, but it's not super necessary to explain on a general level what's going on so that you can make, educated decisions about what you want to do. So that's diffraction. Another takeaway from that is Low frequencies, again, are huge. Like, they're really big. So in a room, low frequencies are usually an issue because they can just diffract around whatever the crap they want. They're just too big. And we have problems on all levels with these things because of their size. So getting the low end of a room to sound good is usually a major focus at the construction phase, because that's the phase where you're dealing with, the biggest things. You're dealing with the size and shape of a room. So people will spend more time, that's the time to figure out what you're going to do about the low end, because that way you can really tailor it the way you want. Other times you're kind of screwed. You're not screwed. There's ways of dealing with it, but it's just much more difficult to get the low end to do it. Most people will just try and control the low end rather than get a low end to sound the way they want it to. So anyways, diffraction, sound bending around an object. Next, we have refraction. Refraction simply means sounds bouncing off of an object. There's also one I don't have on here that I'm going to cover real quick. It's called transmission. Transmission just means that sound goes through an object. And I guess we'll talk about it a little bit with the absorption, but some percentage of a sound will transmit through an object. And of course, the object's density, what it's made of, which would also, I suppose, sort of affect the density, but I guess you could have different levels of density of a material. So anyways, the object itself plays a role in this. We're going to go back to refraction here for a second, though. So we have this thing called refraction. That means sound is bouncing off of an object. There are two types of refraction that we're concerned with. They are called specular refraction and diffuse refraction. Specular refraction refers to sound bouncing off of an object that resembles the original thing that hit that object. So I speak, it hits, let's say, my computer screen, it bounces off, and then I hear an echo that I can discern as the actual words that I just said. That would be you can think of it as like a delay. So you delay it, or an echo. Those would be specular refractions. You can tell that they sound like a copy of whatever it was that hit it. If you were to look into a mirror and see yourself, that reflection of you would be a specular refraction. So, and in acoustics, anyways. I don't know about the whole light side. I haven't studied that side, so... but then there's another one. It's called diffuse refraction. If we were to draw on our light analogy again, with lights coming into this room and it's hitting a white wall. However, you don't see like a picture of all the stuff outside coming into your room. You just see light coming off the wall. It just gets brighter. You can't see a particular picture. That would be a diffuse refraction. So sound comes into a room and it bounces around, but you don't hear a specific thing. The room has gotten louder. It just sounds louder, like reverb. So that's refraction, and those are the two kinds. And of course, there are ways of simulating them both. Now we're going to get into absorption, and I guess this ties in better with transmission. Absorption is when absorption is when an object absorbs some sound. It's really straightforward. It's called absorption, and there's all sorts of rules about length and density and stuff. We talked a little bit about absorption. Like here I have this is a pretty absorptive material. If I put it in front of me, you notice there's quite a substantial difference, and I'm talking a bit louder as well. There's quite a substantial difference in what this does to my voice, because it is absorbing frequencies. Now there's two kinds of absorptions we're concerned with, really. One is called frictional absorption, meaning that the waves of the sound are hitting that object, that material, and it's causing friction, and it's getting absorbed. The actual energy that was my voice was getting absorbed by that piece of foam. The next thing that the other kind is called sympathetic resonance, and you notice it's resonance again. So a system's resonating, and you can think of it like this: if you were sitting in a square room and you had a tennis ball or a racquetball or something, and you threw that racquetball against a hard wall, it's going to bounce right off that wall and come right back. It's not going to be absorbed very much. But let's say that we have something that can vibrate, that is able to resonate with that frequency. Now, it's a little counterintuitive with the resonance I explained earlier, because that talks about resonance that builds up. This isn't resonance that builds up. This is just something that can vibrate. So we have ourselves a tennis ball or racquetball, and we're in our room. We throw it against the hard wall, it bounces right back. That wall doesn't vibrate very much at all. It just bounces right back. Now, let's say that we replace one of these walls with a trampoline. So this trampoline, if we throw our tennis ball against this trampoline, the trampoline is going to give, and then it's going to spit it back out, but it will have taken some of that vibrational energy away from the tennis ball, so it doesn't bounce back as far. And so if we were to set up like 2 trampolines and throw a tennis ball and try to get it bounced back and forth between them, it would be substantially harder to do rather than if we had just straight walls there. If we would be able to get more bounces between the walls if we were to throw it between them. And so that is that's like sympathetic resonance. So something resonates with it and it actually takes some of the energy away. Now, of course, something can resonate in it in a way that's good for that frequency, or I guess not good, just in many cases it's actually bad, but it can actually encourage that that energy to continue. And that's the other type of resonance we talked about earlier. So now let's talk about the last thing, if you're still with me, that is diffusion. So diffusion we've also talked about a little bit as well. And that is basically it's an object that is made to bounce the sound off in a different direction. That way we can avoid things like standing waves. We can avoid things like, well, mostly just standing waves is really what we really want to do. But another thing we want to do is we want to spread the sound around in a room evenly. That's usually the goal of a diffuser. But in reverb, it plays a big role as well. So there's a whole bunch of other places diffusion comes up. But basically what people do is if sound hits an object, like let's say it's a flat wall, it hits the wall, it's like boom, and it goes bah, it comes off this wall, making those exact noises. Then the diffusion would not be, it would be that pattern. But let's say that we put like a bunch of little like things on the wall, like some batteries or whatever, some sort of something to bounce it. So as the sound hits it, some of it's going to hit, let me see if we can do it. Some of it's going to hit the top of this battery, and instead of going like off where it was going before, now it's going to bounce up and it's going to bounce down. It's going to bounce all over the room. And so we get our sound spread out more evenly in the room. This can help big time with filling up the room, because sometimes you'll have dead spots in a room, especially with low frequencies. And so diffusing the low one, though, is also really freaking hard. There's actually a number of really interesting methods, but basically diffusion just means that you are spreading the sound around in a room more evenly. You are spreading the sound out from where it was going to bounce before. You've altered that path based on what the sound is hitting. So, for example, I have this bookcase thing behind me, and I should actually probably fill it up with more books. But what it is I just don't want to fill up the top end because I'm afraid that the thing will fall over. What this gives me, though, is sound will hit that, and because of all these irregular surfaces, they'll bounce off in directions it didn't bounce off before, and it will actually mix the sound in my room. And that could be a good mixing or a bad mixing, and there's these types of sequences you could get. There's the quadratic root sequence, I believe, and then there's the primal root sequence. I don't know. I forgot. I was recently reading about it, though. There's a couple different sequences that are built to diffuse rooms well. And they've been proven, tested, people use them. If you were to build like a cloud diffuser, you'd want to follow these patterns. Now, other diffusers don't rely on a sequence like that. That's like cloud diffuser stuff. If you had like a polycylindrical diffuser, you'd be more concerned with like heights and the angle at which it came out and came back, things like that. But anyways, that's that. Those are some general definitions so that as we get further into this, I can throw around things like, oh, it's diffusing this, or, oh, this is resonating with that. And you'll have some idea of what I'm saying. And I know that that we're on the same page. So if you have any questions, let me know. Support me on Patreon. Subscribe and have a blessed day.
Yeah, every generation screams. Not every generation laughs, though.
Really?
Yeah.